The story of the women codebreakers of the Second World War does not begin with the clatter of machines or the whisper of ciphered messages arriving at Bletchley Park. Instead, it begins in quieter places, small towns, university halls, typing pools, and drawing rooms where young women lived lives that, from the outside, appeared entirely ordinary. None of them could have imagined that within a few years, they would be drawn into one of the most secretive and intellectually fierce battles the world had ever seen. Britain stood on the precipice of destruction. Nazi Germany was sweeping across Europe, and the silent war of signals intelligence would become as vital as troops on a battlefield. And into that silent war, thousands of women were pulled, changed, and etched into history, though for decades the world never knew their names. In the late 1930s, as whispers of another global war grew louder, the British government had begun preparing for the possibility that coded communications would again play a decisive role. The First World War had already proven the strategic importance of cryptography, but the next war promised to elevate the stakes dramatically. Germany had adopted new, complex encryption machines, most notoriously the Enigma, that produced ciphers so intricate that many experts considered them undecipherable. If Britain was to survive, breaking those codes would become imperative. Bletchley Park, an estate tucked away in Buckinghamshire, was chosen as the nerve centre for what would become the government code and cipher school. Initially, only a small, eclectic group populated the site. Eccentric academics, chess champions, crossword prodigies, linguists, mathematicians, and scholars from the universities of Oxford and Cambridge. But as war erupted in 1939, it became clear that the challenge ahead was far too immense for such a small cabal of intellectuals. The complexity of Axis communications and the sheer volume of intercepted messages required a workforce of unprecedented scale and speed. This is where the women of Britain entered the story. They came because they were asked, recruited, or assigned. Some came because they responded to mysterious letters inviting them to interviews. Others were drawn from the ranks of the Women's Royal Naval Service, the Auxiliary Territorial Service, and the Women's Auxiliary Air Force. Some came from families where a quiet suggestion from a trusted schoolmaster or a curious question on an aptitude test changed the course of their lives. Most did not know why they were being summoned. They were simply told their country needed them and that the work would be of the utmost importance. When they arrived at Bletchley Park, many were surprised at how unassuming it appeared. The estate looked like a peculiar mix of Victorian grandeur and architectural eccentricity, hardly the epicenter of Britain's intelligence war. But the moment they passed through the gates, they entered a world unlike anything they had known, a place where secrecy was absolute, routine was relentless, and the consequences of a single breakthrough or oversight could ripple across continents. The earliest arrivals faced the daunting task of learning the rules of a secret world. They were told never to reveal their role to anyone, not even to colleagues in other sections of the park. They were trained to avoid curiosity, to focus on their particular piece of the puzzle, and to accept that they would never know the details of the greater whole. Many later said that this compartmentalization, the strict division of information, felt like working inside a maze in which only a handful of people had the map. Yet despite the compartmentalized structure, the work of these women formed the backbone of Bletchley's operations. Without them, the code-breaking giants, people like Alan Turing, Gordon Welchman, Stuart Milner-Barry, and others, could never have achieved what they did. The women were the machine operators, the interceptors, the translators, the analysts, the clerks, the statisticians, and the silent partners in a race against time. The first major challenge confronting them was the German Enigma. Long before the war, Polish cryptanalysts had made critical advances in understanding the machine, but maintaining those insights required continuous adaptation. The Germans changed their settings daily. Each new dawn brought a new challenge, and each intercepted message was a lock begging for a key. Women assigned to Hut 6, for example, were tasked with sorting, cataloging, and testing possible Enigma settings. This work demanded extraordinary patience and razor-sharp precision. A single keystroke error could derail a chain of reasoning. Many of the women who worked in these huts recalled the atmosphere as equal parts tense and meticulous. They worked long shifts, often through the night. Yet despite the pressure, camaraderie flourished in the cramped wooden buildings. Friendships were formed over cups of weak tea, hurried conversations during shift changes, and the unspoken understanding that every minute mattered. But not all the work involved mechanical repetition. Many women demonstrated exceptional analytical skill. They noticed patterns in coded messages, identified linguistic quirks in German naval communications, or recognized subtle changes in enemy transmission habits. Some, like the brilliant Jean Valentine and Mavis Beatty, would crack codes that shifted the tides of entire military campaigns. Beatty, for instance, deciphered a key Italian naval message that paved the way for the British victory at the Battle of Cape Matapan. The significance of her achievement was so great that military leaders later described it as one of the turning points of the Mediterranean campaign. Yet the women themselves often thought of their contributions as simply doing a job. The culture of secrecy was so strict that many did not know the ramifications of their breakthroughs. Only decades later, when the files were declassified, did they learn they had saved thousands of lives. Outside the huts, beyond the focus of the code-breaking rooms, a vast ecosystem supported the operation. Women ran the bomb machines in outstations, immense electromechanical devices designed to test Enigma settings rapidly. The sound of bombs, clacking, whirring, humming, became the soundtrack of their lives. The rhythm was hypnotic, and many operators learned to detect mechanical problems by ear alone. These women worked in rotating shifts, braving cold rooms, deafening noise, and a workload that seemed endless. Their endurance and discipline became a cornerstone of the code-breaking effort. Still, other women were stationed across the United Kingdom and abroad, intercepting encrypted radio signals. These wireless operators, part of the Y service, listened to enemy transmissions with unwavering attention, capturing every dot, dash, and number. Their work fed the constant stream of data that Bletchley relied upon. Without them, the park would have been starved of material. What made all of this extraordinary was that many of these women were only in their late teens or early 20s. They carried a responsibility that would have overwhelmed people twice their age, yet they embraced it with determination and often humor. They formed choirs, staged amateur theater performances, debated politics, shared jokes about the cold huts and terrible food, and found moments of levity in days filled with pressure. And they did all of it while knowing they could never speak of their experiences. Not to their parents, their friends, or even their husbands after the war. Silence became second nature. Stories of heartbreak, triumph, exhaustion, and intellectual exhilaration were sealed away for decades. In this chapter, we begin to understand that the story of the women codebreakers is not merely a tale of machines and ciphers, but a human story, one of resilience, invisible labor, and buried brilliance. These women did not fit the world's traditional image of war heroes. They were not on the front lines. They did not fly aircraft or storm beaches. Yet they fought in the shadows, intercepting, decoding, analyzing, and outmaneuvering one of the most formidable military machines in history. As we move forward, we will delve deeper into the lives, tasks, and impact of these remarkable women. We will uncover how their work shortened the war, shifted battles, revealed enemy plans, and safeguarded Allied forces. We will also explore the cultural expectations of women at the time, the ways in which their talents were discovered and sometimes underestimated, and the legacy they left behind. But for now, as the gates of Bletchley Park close behind the first wave of recruits, we stand at the threshold of a hidden world. The women who stepped into this world did not know what awaited them. They only knew that the war had come, that they had been chosen for something vital, and that from this point forward, their lives would be shaped by secrets they would carry for the rest of their days. The women who arrived at Bletchley Park in the early years of the war entered a world that was both chaotic and highly structured, improvised yet bound by rules, intellectually electrifying yet emotionally taxing. What they encountered inside those huts and corridors was unlike anything they had been prepared for by their upbringing, their education, or the expectations society had set for them. Britain in the 1930s was still a place where women were rarely imagined in roles beyond teaching, nursing, secretarial work, or domestic life. Yet here, at this strange estate in Buckinghamshire, they were being asked to shoulder part of the most complex intelligence operation in the nation's history. The recruitment process for women was unusual, unpredictable, and often strangely understated. Some young women received letters from the Foreign Office inviting them to interviews without explanation. The tone was polite but cryptic, hinting at work of national importance but offering no specifics. Others were approached by university tutors who quietly assessed their potential for analytical or linguistic work. Still others were drawn from the ranks of the women's services, selected not for combat roles, but for their aptitude in mathematics, their ability to type at high speed, or their talent for meticulous organization. Many of these women later recalled that they accepted the summons more out of curiosity and a sense of duty than any understanding of what awaited them. Britain was already in the grip of war, and the government had urged all citizens, men and women alike, to contribute however they could. But the arrival process at Bletchley Park created a sense of entering another dimension. Women often described the experience as if they were stepping into a secret society, one where the members recognized one another not by uniforms or badges, but by the shared understanding that they had crossed into a world ruled by silence. Upon arrival, most new recruits sat through a briefing that stressed secrecy above all else. They were told never to discuss their work outside their designated hut. They were told that conversations in the dining hall, on trains, or in letters to family could result in catastrophic leaks. They were warned that even innocent remarks might be overheard by enemy agents. Whether this was strictly true or a method of maintaining discipline, the effect was powerful. The women learned to compartmentalize their lives completely. Work belonged inside the gates of Bletchley Park. Everything outside the gates was a different world entirely. What they found once they settled into their assignments varied immensely. Bletchley Park was not a monolithic operation, but a network of huts, blocks, and outstations, each dedicated to specific tasks. From Hut 4 to Hut 8, from the testery to the translation rooms, from the Colossus operations to the Y service outposts, the ecosystem was vast and intricately interconnected. Women were woven through every level of this system, performing tasks that spanned from repetitive mechanical processes to high-level intellectual breakthroughs. One of the first tasks many women encountered was the constant need to sift through massive volumes of intercepted communications. Enemy radio transmissions arrived day and night from listening stations across the country. Operators in these stations, many of them women, had been meticulously trained to intercept Morse code signals. Every transmission, whether a simple weather report or an urgent military instruction, was transcribed and sent to Bletchley. By the time it arrived in the huts, it appeared as sequences of letters, a jumble of apparently meaningless symbols. But to the codebreakers, these sequences held the rhythms and fingerprints of enemy operations. The women assigned to sort these messages had to develop an eye for subtle distinctions. They learned to spot traffic patterns, which call signs belonged to naval units, which to Luftwaffe bases, which followed the rhythms of routine communications and which spiked before major operations. Even before a code was cracked, the metadata alone, the timing, frequency, and nature of the traffic, could provide critical intelligence. Yet it was the actual process of breaking codes that revealed just how vital the women's roles were. One early challenge was the Luftwaffe Enigma system, which produced messages that often shared structural patterns and predictable content. Women in the huts noticed repetitive phrases, habitual word choices, and even the idiosyncrasies of individual German operators. These tendencies became stepping stones in the deciphering process. A careless operator who reused a phrase or maintained a predictable routine might inadvertently reveal the starting point for an entire day's messages. This required not only keen attention, but an almost intuitive sense of linguistic logic. Some women described their work as similar to solving crossword puzzles. Others saw it like unraveling a tightly knotted string, where every small tug moved the pattern slightly closer to clarity. Regardless of how they understood it, their contributions often formed the first crucial link in a chain that would eventually lead to decrypted Allied intelligence. Far from the intellectual quiet one might picture, Bletchley Park was also a place of immense noise. Nowhere was this more true than the bomb outstations, facilities that housed massive electromechanical machines designed to test Enigma settings at rapid speed. The bombs ran incessantly, filling the rooms with clattering, rhythmic sound. Women who worked these machines described the noise as overwhelming at first, but eventually familiar, even comforting in a strange way. The machines were their companions through long, cold nights. The women operated the bombs with precision, stopping the machine at specific indicators, retrieving the readings, and noting down potential solutions. Working in these bombs outstations demanded stamina, endurance, and resilience. The rooms were poorly heated, the shifts long and irregular, and the work both monotonous and incredibly tense. A small mistake, misreading a stop, skipping a step, could derail hours of progress. Nonetheless, the operators became experts at navigating the routines. Some could sense mechanical problems simply by listening to the rhythm of the machines. Others developed a camaraderie strengthened by the shared hardship of nightly shifts, cold tea, and stiff uniforms. Back at Bletchley Park itself, women in the cryptanalytic huts often worked under immense pressure. They were surrounded by fast-thinking mathematicians, linguists, and codebreakers, many of whom were brilliant and eccentric in equal measure. Stories circulated of men pacing furiously, muttering equations under their breath, erupting in sudden shouts when a breakthrough struck. Amid this intensity, the women held the operations together. They organized the intercepts, maintained the card indexes, aligned data sets, and executed painstaking processes with quiet precision. Their systematic approach balanced the creative disorder of the lead codebreakers, creating a steady rhythm within the controlled chaos of the huts. One defining feature of the women's experiences was the tension between their immense responsibility and the constraints placed on their identities. Many of them had been raised in an era that undervalued their intellectual potential. They arrived to find themselves working alongside some of the greatest minds of their time, yet they were rarely credited publicly. Even inside Bletchley Park, certain assumptions persisted. Women were often steered toward clerical or machine-based tasks, while men were funneled into analytical roles. But the war had a way of breaking down barriers, even if quietly. When a woman demonstrated exceptional skill, the system adapted, sometimes reluctantly, sometimes eagerly, to utilize her talents. Such was the case for women like Joan Clark, who became a full-fledged cryptanalyst in Hut 8 and worked closely with Alan Turing. Though she faced pay disparities and limitations on advancement, her abilities were undeniable. Her work helped unravel critical naval codes, saving Allied ships from devastating U-boat attacks. Others, like Margaret Rock, Ruth Briggs, and Mavis Lever, proved themselves invaluable in breaking codes that shaped major military engagements. Despite these examples, many women did not see themselves as extraordinary. They often described their experiences not in terms of heroism or brilliance, but in terms of routine. Work that needed doing, shifts that needed covering, codes that needed cracking. This humble perspective became a defining characteristic of their narrative. Yet the truth is that the war would have played out very differently without them. Their contributions were woven into every decrypted message, every intercepted signal, every analytical breakthrough. Life outside the huts was its own dimension of the Bletchley experience. The estate lacked modern comforts, its buildings were drafty, its heating unreliable, its food unremarkable. Many women lived in local billets, walking or cycling to the park in all weather. Winter mornings brought icy commutes through fog or sleet, while summer nights buzzed with insects that drifted through open windows as operators struggled to stay awake through midnight shifts. Yet there were moments of joy. The women remembered dances in the dining hall, where musicians played and the drab routines of wartime life briefly lifted. They recalled parties in the nearby town, bicycle rides along country paths, and quiet walks through the gardens on stolen breaks. They forged friendships that would last for decades, bound not only by shared work, but by the shared burden of secrecy. They laughed, they confided, they supported one another through fatigue and stress. In a place defined by hidden work, these human connections became essential. Romances blossomed too, sometimes awkwardly, sometimes passionately, always under the shadow of the official Secrets Act. Courtships unfolded in fragments, half-hinted conversations, hurried dances, shared glances across crowded canteens. Many women later married men they met at Bletchley, though even within these relationships, the secrecy persisted. Couples who worked in different huts often did not know what the other did until decades later. Yet beneath the surface of camaraderie, the emotional toll of the work could not be ignored. The unending flow of intercepted messages brought the war into the huts with relentless immediacy. Women deciphered messages that revealed enemy movements, pending attacks, and tragic losses. They saw the cold logistics of war laid bare in numbers and orders. Though they were safe from bombs and bullets, they carried the mental weight of knowing that their efforts could save, or fail to save, lives. And still, they persevered. They adapted to the rhythms of Bletchley Park, its urgency, its secrecy, its mixture of exhaustion and exhilaration. They became experts in their fields, even if the world would not recognize it until much later. They learned to live double lives, outwardly ordinary, inwardly engaged in one of the most pivotal operations of the war. As the war progressed, the workforce at Bletchley Park expanded dramatically. Women soon made up nearly 3/4 of the staff. Their integration was not an afterthought, but an essential feature of the operation's success. From intercept operators to machine runners, from linguists to cryptanalysts, from librarians to statisticians, the women formed the connective tissue of the entire intelligence effort. By the end of the war, they would have helped break not only Enigma, but also the far more complex Lawrence cipher used by high-level German commands. They would have contributed to victories in the Atlantic, the Mediterranean, North Africa, and beyond. They would have shortened the war by years, according to many historians, and saved countless lives. But those victories lay ahead. For now, in this chapter, we watch as the women settle into their roles, navigating a labyrinth of machines, wires, and codes. They have become the hidden workforce of a hidden war, operating in the shadows, but moving the wheels of history with every intercepted signal and every cracked cipher. As we continue, we will look more closely at some of their specific breakthroughs, the challenges they faced, and the evolving nature of the intelligence war. But at this point in the story, one thing is already clear. The women of Bletchley Park were not simply assistants or supporting characters. They were the lifeblood of a vast and intricate operation, one that would change the course of the war and reshape the possibilities for women in the decades that followed. In the early years of the war, as Bletchley Park expanded from a curious estate into the epicenter of Britain's intelligence operations, the sheer breadth of work conducted there grew with astonishing speed. The women who arrived found themselves stepping into roles that, while sometimes repetitive, were part of a vast and interlocking system of logic, persistence, and ingenuity. It was in these roles that some of the most consequential breakthroughs of the war were made, often quietly, unexpectedly, and by minds that history would overlook for decades. By 1941, the park had transitioned from a handful of huts and a skeleton staff into a humming hive of activity. New huts appeared like mushrooms after rain, each one dedicated to a different thread of the intelligence web. There was a constant sense of improvisation, walls built on short notice, cables running across floors, typewriters stationed wherever space allowed. Yet beneath the makeshift appearance lay an increasingly sophisticated framework. Messages arrived from interception stations around the clock. Machine rooms roared with the sound of bombs. Analysts worked through every hour of the day, piecing together fragments of enemy communications, looking for the single clue that would reveal a breakthrough. Among the most remarkable contributions made by women during this period were those related to naval codes. While each branch of the German military used its own version of the Enigma machine, the naval variant, Kriegsmarine Enigma, was notoriously complex. Its intimidation factor stemmed not just from extra rotors and stricter operational habits, but also from the life-or-death stakes attached to naval warfare. German U-boats prowled the Atlantic, sinking Allied convoys with deadly precision. Cracking naval enigma meant more than winning an intellectual contest. It meant saving thousands of lives and protecting the flow of supplies that Britain depended upon. It was in this crucible that women such as Joan Clark, Margaret Rock, and Ruth Briggs would leave a profound mark. Clark, working within Hut 8, alongside Alan Turing and Hugh Alexander, contributed to one of the most challenging code-breaking efforts of the war. The naval codes did not yield easily. Breakthroughs were often tied to spotting tiny inconsistencies or exploiting predictable patterns in weather reports, message introductions, or operator habits. Women working in the indexing rooms and the card catalog systems were instrumental in supporting these breakthroughs. They maintained vast stores of information, call signs, message signatures, rotor settings, crib sheets, that analysts depended on to test hypotheses. One woman later recalled that the card index she managed contained the clues that allowed analysts to leap forward on days when they would otherwise have been stuck. Maintaining that system required meticulous accuracy. A single misplaced card could mean hours lost. Some breakthroughs came from sudden flashes of insight. This was the case with Mavis Lever, later Mavis Beatty, who worked in the naval section under Dilly Knox, a veteran cryptanalyst from the First World War. Knox, eccentric and brilliant, cultivated a small group of talented women he trusted implicitly. Mavis, quick-witted and deeply perceptive, blossomed under his guidance. In 1941, she cracked an Italian naval cipher which revealed the plans for the Italian fleet in the Mediterranean. This intelligence allowed the British to achieve a decisive victory in the Battle of Cape Matapan, an event that shifted the balance of naval power in the region. Mavis was barely in her 20s. Stories like hers capture the essence of the intellectual battleground inside Bletchley Park, a place where youth did not prohibit genius, and where the war demanded far more from individuals than their prior experiences suggested they could offer. Many of the women had never imagined careers in mathematics or cryptanalysis. They arrived expecting clerical work or administrative roles, but soon discovered that their abilities extended far beyond what they had been encouraged to believe before the war. For many, Bletchley Park was the first environment in which their intelligence was not only recognized, but required. This recognition, however, existed within a paradox. Women made up the majority of the workforce, yet institutional assumptions often meant they held positions labeled as support or auxiliary. The walls between these categories blurred in practice. Analysts relied on machine operators, translators depended on indexers, Everyone relied on intercept operators. Without women running the bombs, for example, no analyst could have tested the endless permutations needed to break Enigma. Without the meticulous organizing of information, no cryptographer could have built a pattern or constructed a theory. Bletchley Park functioned because the women made the system work. One of the most complex challenges the park faced was the German switch from standard Enigma to more advanced forms of encryption, including the introduction of the shark cipher used by U-boats. When the Germans increased the number of rotors and adopted stricter procedures, Allied intelligence briefly went dark. Ships were sunk in devastating numbers. It was one of the bleakest periods of the Atlantic campaign. Throughout this crisis, the pressure inside Bletchley's huts was immense. Women worked longer shifts and took on even more responsibility. Joan Clark and others in Hut 8 kept grinding forward, searching for weaknesses in the upgraded systems. The machine operators worked non-stop, so much so that the outstations had to expand and recruit even more women to keep the bombs running 24 hours a day. The breakthrough eventually came through a mixture of mathematics, ingenuity, luck, and relentless effort. When naval Enigma once again became readable, Allied losses dropped dramatically. The convoy routes were secured, and the balance of the Atlantic War began to shift. Winston Churchill himself later said that the U-boat threat had been the only thing that truly scared him. Much of the credit for its eventual mitigation lay in Bletchley Park, and a significant part of that credit belonged to the women who had labored endlessly behind those closed doors. As the war continued, the work at Bletchley Park evolved. New technologies emerged, including the groundbreaking Colossus, the world's first large-scale programmable electronic computer. Colossus was used to attack the Lawrence cipher, a system even more complicated than Enigma and used by the uppermost levels of the German High Command. The women who operated Colossus were pioneers of computer science without realizing it. They learned to manage banks of valves, switches, and paper tapes that moved at dizzying speed. Problems occurred frequently. Paper tapes tore, valves overheated, circuits misbehaved. The operators had to be quick thinkers, adept at diagnosing mechanical issues and working under intense time pressure. The work on Lawrence could feel abstract. The messages coming through were not tactical orders, but strategic communications, discussions between senior Nazi officials, planning documents, broader policy statements. When deciphered, they revealed how the German war effort was being orchestrated at its highest levels. Though the women processing these messages rarely saw their full meaning, they knew the stakes were enormous. It was at Bletchley Park, too, that women contributed to one of the most important intelligence breakthroughs of the war: the discovery that the Germans had no idea their highest-level communications were being read. The secrecy was so complete that no enemy operator ever seemed to suspect what was happening. This knowledge emboldened Allied leadership to rely more heavily on ultra-intelligence, confident that the advantage would not be lost. Yet, despite all this, the world outside remained largely unaware of Bletchley Park's existence. Even the families of the women working there knew nothing. Parents assumed their daughters worked in clerical positions. Sweethearts imagined them sitting in mundane offices typing memos. Wives who later married former male colleagues often discovered, years after the war, that they had been working in the same hut without ever knowing it. This mutual secrecy created strange moments after the war, as husbands and wives finally revealed the truths they had been keeping from each other, only to discover how intertwined their wartime paths had actually been. Inside Bletchley Park, the culture of silence shaped daily life. Women slept with the knowledge that they could not discuss their frustrations, fears, or triumphs with anyone outside the park. They lived in two worlds, one of high stakes and secret pressures, and another of ration books, blackout curtains, and modest domestic expectations. This dual existence created an emotional weight that could not be set down, even when they went home at night. But while secrecy dominated the professional sphere, the personal side of Bletchley was surprisingly warm and vibrant. Women remember the park as a place of friendships and laughter. They describe games of rounders on the lawn, dances in the dining hall, small pranks played during long night shifts, and the unspoken camaraderie forged in shared struggle. Many also remember acts of quiet rebellion, smuggling extra food into the huts, sneaking out after curfew, or decorating drab workspaces with flowers picked from the estate gardens. Despite the long hours and heavy responsibility, the environment fostered a sense of purpose. The women knew they were contributing to something vital. Even if they could not see the final intelligence reports, they sensed their actions mattered. And often, they were right. A message deciphered at dawn might by noon help command a fleet or redirect an air attack. The turnaround could be shockingly fast. Analysts in the huts felt their work pulse through the veins of the war. As the months wore on, the intelligence produced at Bletchley influenced virtually every major front. North Africa, where Rommel's movements were tracked. The Mediterranean, where naval battles turned on code-breaking insights. The skies over Britain, where Luftwaffe operations were mapped. And even the Eastern Front, where German plans were sometimes revealed before they could be enacted. Many women at Bletchley later expressed quiet amazement at how much their work mattered. Only decades after the war, when the secrecy finally lifted, did they understand the scale of what they had been part of. Some struggled to reconcile their memories of mundane tasks with the enormous impact historians attributed to those tasks. Others finally felt a sense of validation, knowing that the world now recognized what they had sacrificed and achieved. In examining this chapter of their story, we see clearly how women were not simply present at Bletchley Park. They were essential. Their labor, insight, patience, creativity, and resilience formed a backbone that historians now acknowledge as vital to Allied victory. The code-breaking successes that shaped military strategy were not the work of a few isolated geniuses. They were the product of thousands of individuals, many of them women, working in concert. As we move forward, the story will shift again, exploring how these women navigated the growing complexity of the war, the arrival of new technologies, and the extraordinary challenges that emerged as the Allies pushed toward victory. But for now, in this chapter, we recognize the intellectual firepower, the unnoticed brilliance, and the extraordinary stamina of the women who broke codes that reshaped history. As the war progressed beyond its early uncertainties, Bletchley Park grew not only in size, but in complexity. What had begun as a small, somewhat eccentric operation transformed into a sprawling intelligence machine, with thousands of men and women engaged in an unending race against the Axis power's cryptographic evolution. The pressure increased dramatically, so did the stakes. And through it all, women formed the backbone of the operation, keeping the system running even as it strained under the weight of war. By late 1942 and into 1943, Britain and its allies faced a shifting global landscape. Victories in North Africa and the growing momentum of American involvement marked a turning point in the conflict. Yet success on the battlefield was often built on success in the shadows. Every decrypted message carried influence, sometimes subtle, sometimes immediately decisive, over operations occurring thousands of miles away. Inside Bletchley Park, this period was defined by intense focus and the constant introduction of new demands. Huts were reorganized, new ones were built. Staff transfers became common as different sections expanded or adapted. Women who had arrived expecting clerical or support roles found themselves moving into increasingly technical domains. Others who had grown accustomed to certain routines were suddenly thrust into entirely new responsibilities as the intelligence picture shifted. One of the most dramatic changes came with the expansion of the work against Lawrence, the high-level German cipher used between Hitler, the German High Command, and key military leaders. This cipher, fundamentally different from Enigma, required not just clever cryptographic insight, but a level of mechanical and computational capacity never before attempted. The enemy messages were long, complex, and encoded with a depth of encryption that overwhelmed traditional methods. This was the world into which the pioneering Colossus computers were born, and the women who operated them became accidental trailblazers of the digital age. The Colossus rooms were unlike anything on Earth. Banks of valves glowed with hot, fragile light. Paper tapes whipped through readers at astonishing speeds. Switches, dials, and rotary controls lined the walls. Women assigned to these machines quickly became experts at diagnosing faults, adjusting circuits, managing tape feeds, and interpreting results. They learned to listen for the subtle changes in sound that signaled a problem. A tape stutter, a valve hum, an unexpected click in the reader. Many of the young women working these machines had no background in engineering. They had not studied electronics in school. Indeed, most British schools did not teach such subjects to girls at all. But wartime necessity created opportunity. They learned quickly because they had to. They mastered unfamiliar technologies because failure was unthinkable. Every malfunction delayed the analysis of critical German communications. Every successful run brought Allied leaders closer to understanding enemy intentions. The women running Colossus later recalled the tension of waiting for results. They described the peculiar thrill of watching the machine work, the strobing lights illuminating the darkened room, the mechanical clatter filling the air as patterns emerged from chaos. Sometimes the output revealed nothing of value. Other times it provided a breakthrough that would guide Allied strategy for days or weeks to come. Alongside Colossus and the Lawrence efforts, the women in the Enigma huts continued to carry out enormous amounts of analytical labor. Naval Enigma remained a top priority, as U-boats continued to threaten the Atlantic supply lines even in the later stages of the war. Women in Hut 6 and Hut 8 became increasingly skilled not just at repetitive tasks, but at developing insights that supported cryptographers' hypotheses. They noticed patterns that others missed. They understood the rhythms of enemy operators. They grasped the subtleties of message procedure in ways that sometimes eluded even senior analysts. Their contributions were not limited to Britain. Across the world, women supported intelligence operations that fed into Bletchley Park's work. In listening stations from Scotland to North Africa, from Canada to Ceylon, women intercepted enemy transmissions under difficult and often dangerous conditions. Their work required intense concentration. A single missed character could render a message useless. Cold, fatigue, and isolation were frequent companions, but their dedication ensured the flow of intercepted messages never stopped. Back at Bletchley, the physical environment continued to evolve. The huts, originally intended as temporary structures, now housed hundreds of workers. They were cramped, drafty, and constantly buzzing with activity. The introduction of more machines, more desks, and more staff pushed the limits of space. Footpaths between huts became muddy trenches in the rain. Heating systems faltered in winter, leaving everyone bundled in coats and scarves even while working. In summer, the huts became stifling, with little ventilation and the constant hum of equipment adding to the discomfort. Despite the challenges, morale remained surprisingly resilient. The staff understood the importance of their mission. They found ways to maintain energy through companionship, humor, and creativity. Women organized informal clubs. Choirs sang in the evenings. Amateur acting groups put on shows that brought laughter to weary colleagues. Birthdays were celebrated with rationed treats, scrounged cakes, and handmade cards. Even small joys, like a rare piece of chocolate or an unexpected day of sunshine, became treasured moments. Romances continued to blossom, too, though they often operated within a complicated web of secrecy and exhaustion. Couples who met at Bletchley Park managed their relationships in snatched conversations, quick walks around the estate, or dances in the canteen. The secrecy surrounding their work meant they could not easily share their frustrations or triumphs, yet many found solace simply in the presence of someone who understood the odd rhythm of their lives. For others, the war years offered a taste of independence they had never experienced before. Many women came from traditional homes where their life path had been expected to follow a simple progression: education, perhaps a short period of work, then marriage and family. Bletchley Park disrupted those expectations. The women there lived away from their families, earned their own wages, and made their own decisions. They discovered the thrill of intellectual challenge, the joy of contributing to something larger than themselves, and the confidence that came from mastering skills previously deemed out of reach. This newfound independence would shape many of their lives after the war, even as society attempted to usher them back into pre-war gender roles. But during the war, their independence was essential. The sheer volume of work demanded initiative, leadership, and adaptability. Women were promoted to supervisory roles. They managed teams of operators, oversaw machine rooms, and ensured that the complex web of workflows ran smoothly. In many huts, women were the ones who maintained order during chaotic night shifts, who solved unexpected bottlenecks, and who brought calm to frantic efforts to meet critical deadlines. They also played a vital role in interpreting the significance of intelligence. Though the final analysis of decrypted messages often rested with senior officials or military planners, the preliminary sorting and contextual understanding frequently began with the women who handled the raw intercepts. They noticed when something seemed unusual, when a tone shifted, when a sender changed patterns. Their instincts often flagged messages that would later prove crucial. Occasionally, the emotional toll of the work surfaced in unexpected ways. A woman deciphering a Luftwaffe message might recognize the signs of an imminent bombing raid on a British city. Another might decode a naval report confirming the sinking of an Allied ship. Still others worked on messages that revealed brutality on the Eastern Front or logistical details of deportations and atrocities. Though the women rarely saw the full picture, they sometimes saw enough to understand that their work intersected with the darkest realities of war. Yet through this emotional strain, they persisted. They found strength in one another, in their shared purpose, and in the belief that their work would help bring the war to an end. For many, this belief became a source of hope that sustained them through exhaustion and uncertainty. By 1944, Bletchley Park had reached a peak of efficiency. Its output was unprecedented. The flow of decrypted intelligence, known as Ultra, was now integral to Allied strategy. The women knew the war was changing. They sensed it in the decreasing urgency of certain messages, the shifting patterns of enemy communication, and the whisperings in the canteen that major operations were being planned. They did not know the details, of course. The secrecy remained absolute. But they knew that their efforts were contributing directly to something significant, perhaps even decisive. As Allied forces prepared for the invasion of Europe, the intelligence produced by Bletchley Park shaped everything from troop movements to deception operations. Every accurate prediction of enemy intent mattered. Every intercepted message helped clarify the picture. And the women, still working in their humble huts and noisy machine rooms, were at the heart of that effort. In this chapter of the story, we see how the war's middle years became a period of transformation, technological, personal, and organizational. The women grew into roles that challenged old assumptions and pushed the boundaries of what was considered possible. They became essential in ways that could no longer be dismissed or ignored. And though the world would not yet know their names, their work was defining the course of history. As we move forward, the story will lead us into the war's final phases, the build-up to D-Day, the last frantic months of code-breaking, and the moment when the world finally emerged from 6 years of destruction. And through it all, the women of Bletchley Park continued to carry the weight of secrets, labor, and brilliance that helped bring the war to its end. By early 1944, the war had entered a moment of extraordinary tension. Victory was no longer a distant hope, it was becoming a visible possibility. Yet that possibility depended on precision, secrecy, and the coordination of countless moving parts, military, logistical, and strategic. And at the quiet center of it all, Bletchley Park continued its relentless work, with thousands of women maintaining the pace, intensity, and accuracy that had become its defining hallmark. This period, leading up to the Allied invasion of Normandy, represented the height of ultra-intelligence. Nearly every major military decision flowed through decrypted enemy communications. The messages revealed where German forces were concentrated, how supplies were being routed, what reinforcements were expected, and what deception operations the Germans themselves were conducting. The information was so valuable that Winston Churchill famously referred to the codebreakers as the geese that laid the golden eggs and never cackled. The women of Bletchley Park were the quiet caretakers of that miracle. The build-up to D-Day placed enormous demands on the intelligence apparatus. The Allies needed to know everything. How many German divisions were stationed in France? What the German High Command believed about an invasion? How fast reinforcements could reach Normandy or Pas-de-Calais? And whether the deception plans designed to mislead the Germans were succeeding. To gather this knowledge, Bletchley Park needed to maintain near-perfect accuracy, speed, and subtlety. Women worked tirelessly through these months, operating machines, indexing data, analyzing patterns, translating messages, and routing intelligence to military commands. In many ways, their work became more intense than ever before. Shifts grew longer. Mistakes became potentially catastrophic, and the sheer volume of intercepted traffic increased dramatically as Germany intensified its communications across both the Western and Eastern fronts. It was during this time that the women of the Y service, the listening stations scattered across Britain and beyond, played one of their most vital roles. These women, often working in isolated outposts in freezing or humid conditions, captured the raw Morse signals that would feed into Bletchley Park. Operators in Scarborough, Cheadle, Withensea, Bowmanor, and remote posts elsewhere listened night and day. They wrote furiously, capturing every letter they heard, often without knowing where their intercepts were going or why they mattered. Their work was mentally exhausting. Morse operators described a strange merging of sound and instinct. After months, the dits and dars no longer felt like symbols. They became voices, rhythms, personalities. Operators recognized individual German radio men by their fists, their distinctive encoding styles. They could tell when an operator was tired, anxious, hurried, or sloppy. These microscopic cues sometimes helped Bletchley Park analysts guess what kind of message was being transmitted or whether something unusual was happening on the other end. In the huts, the women sorting these intercepts developed a keen sense for urgency. They learned to identify traffic spikes that signaled German troop movements. They flagged anomalous shifts in frequencies or call signs. Often, the first hint of an impending German redeployment came not from a decrypted message, but from a vigilant woman noticing a change in the rhythm of transmissions. The intelligence system was only as strong as its earliest observers, and women formed the front line of this unseen watchtower. Meanwhile, in the machine rooms, bomb operators worked around the clock. Outstations across the country ran dozens of machines simultaneously. These women barely had time to rest between shifts, and the noise of the bombs filled their dreams. But they kept going, driven by the knowledge that without their work, no Enigma decrypts could be tested in time to have value. The intensity of the work grew as D-Day approached. Analysts needed faster results, commanders needed clearer insights, and Bletchley Park needed to remain hidden. The entire operation depended on the Germans never suspecting that their communications were compromised. To maintain this illusion, the Allies often disguised the origins of intelligence, attributing it to reconnaissance flights or spies. This meant the women could never know exactly how their efforts shaped decisions, only that they were integral to them. One of the most remarkable aspects of this period was the collaborative spirit that emerged across Bletchley Park. The divisions between huts, though strictly maintained for security, softened in practice as pressure mounted. Women shared silent signals, nods, and glances across corridors, knowing without words that each section relied on the others. There were rare, fleeting moments on the estate grounds when someone rushing from one hut to another carried an expression that told others something significant had happened. But no one asked questions. They simply returned to their posts with renewed focus. The women also became adept at reading atmosphere. They could sense when a breakthrough was imminent or when a setback had occurred. Even without details, the shifting tone of colleagues' footsteps or the sudden hush in a nearby room spoke volumes. It created an environment where intuition and empathy were as essential as technical skill. Back in the analysis rooms, the women working on Lawrence, the Tunney cipher, played a major role in deciphering high-level German intentions. The Lawrence messages were long, often thousands of characters, filled with strategic reflections and directives. While the final interpretation was handled by top analysts, the preliminary decoding, formatting, error-checking, and structuring were often executed by women. The clarity of their work determined how quickly senior commanders received accurate intelligence. During these months, some women found themselves grappling with the moral weight of what they discovered. Though they rarely saw full messages, even fragments sometimes revealed harrowing details. German discussions about punitive actions, orders for forced labor transfers, supply arrangements for concentration camps, or chilling references to atrocities. The emotional burden of glimpsing these horrors, yet being unable to speak of them, stayed with many women for life. Yet even in the face of emotional strain, the women of Bletchley Park found ways to maintain their resilience. Friendships deepened during night shifts, as women shared jokes, whispered frustrations, and comforted one another during moments of exhaustion. In the canteen, they traded stories of home, dreamed about post-war futures, and laughed about the oddities of their strange, secret lives. Some knitted between shifts. Others wrote poetry or kept small diaries, careful not to record anything that could break security rules. These tiny acts of normalcy helped balance the immense pressure they lived under. Despite the seriousness of their work, a sense of absurdity often ran through their days, an absurdity born of secrecy, stress, and the quirks of Bletchley Park. Women reported mice darting across desks, eccentric male cryptanalysts delivering lectures on obscure topics during tea breaks, bicycles crashing into one another on narrow paths, and endless jokes about the British weather. Amidst war, life still found space for silliness. And in the midst of all this, the women sensed something in the air, a turning point. The messages coming through in spring 1944 revealed shifts in German deployment, confusion within the enemy command, and frantic preparations for an anticipated Allied assault. The Germans held tight to the belief that the main invasion would occur at Pas-de-Calais, a misconception the Allies actively cultivated through deception operations like Operation Fortitude. Ultra-intelligence confirmed that the deception was working. Each message Bletchley decoded reinforced the illusion that Normandy was not the primary threat. This information was invaluable for Allied commanders planning Operation Overlord. Women played crucial roles in handling these messages. They typed them, sorted them, decrypted them, and flagged inconsistencies that helped analysts determine whether German expectations were shifting. Their precision ensured that messages reached the right hands in time to shape decisions. Their consistency allowed analysts to detect patterns without worrying about errors in transcription. Their vigilance helped maintain the deception that ultimately contributed to the Allies gaining a foothold in Normandy. As June approached, tension in the huts reached new heights. Women scheduled for night shifts felt the weight of those hours more deeply. Rumors circulated, not spoken aloud, but sensed in the air that something monumental was coming. Yet the staff remained disciplined. Even among close friends, speculation was minimal. The culture of secrecy had become part of who they were. When D-Day finally came on June 6, 1944, the women at Bletchley Park felt the moment not through radio announcements or maps, but through the flood of signals. German messages shifted suddenly, urgently, chaotically. Some women working intercept stations later recalled recognizing the invasion before any official announcement, simply because enemy operators were transmitting wildly, breaking routine patterns. Inside the huts, the pace became frantic but controlled. Every message mattered. Every small insight could save thousands of lives. Women worked with extraordinary focus, ignoring fatigue, hunger, and the emotional enormity of the moment. They later said that the adrenaline carried them through those hours, an adrenaline tied not to excitement, but to duty. Bletchley Park's output during D-Day and the following weeks was extraordinary. Ultra-intelligence revealed where German reinforcements were moving, which divisions were being held in reserve, and how the German High Command interpreted the invasion. This allowed the Allies to anticipate counterattacks, mislead the enemy further, and strengthen their positions. The women who handled these messages likely sensed that they were living through history, even if they did not understand the specific details. But they also understood that their work was far from done. The war would continue for nearly another year, and the intensity of that year would test them more than ever before. In this chapter, the story of the women codebreakers reaches a crescendo, not an ending, but a moment where their years of invisible labor culminated in one of the most significant military operations ever undertaken. Their skill, discipline, and endurance helped make D-Day possible, and their clarity and precision helped make it successful. As the narrative continues, we will move into the final months of the war, months filled with urgency, tragedy, triumph, and the slow, complicated process of returning to a world that had no idea what these women had done in its name. The summer of 1944 should have brought a sense of relief to the women at Bletchley Park. D-Day had succeeded, the Allies were advancing across France, and the end of the war felt closer than ever. Yet for those inside the huts and machine rooms, the pressure did not ease. In many ways, it increased. The final stage of a war is often the most unpredictable, and the German command, though increasingly strained, still communicated frequently, urgently, and with dangerous intent. Every message mattered. Every delay could cost lives. And so the women continued, with a determination and stamina that seemed almost impossible to sustain. The weeks after D-Day brought a rapid shift in the enemy's communication patterns. German officers sent frantic orders as they attempted to regroup, reinforce, and hold their ground. The movement of panzer divisions, the status of supply lines, and the coordination between units all flowed through messages that Bletchley Park tried desperately to intercept, decode, and interpret in real time. Many women later said this period felt like living in a storm, one that never stopped, that demanded constant attention, and that offered no rest. Inside the intercept stations, women listened to an increase in transmissions that often reflected the chaos of German forces under pressure. Operators could hear the stress in enemy signals, the irregular tempo of Morse, the clipped urgency of radio chatter. They captured everything, sending a torrent of intercepts back to Bletchley Park. One operator later recalled that she felt like she was watching the war collapse through sound alone, as if the enemy's defeat had a rhythm one could hear before seeing it on a map. At Bletchley, the huts grew even more crowded. The workforce continued to expand, with new recruits arriving from universities, the women's services, and civilian life. Many of these new arrivals were barely trained before being thrown into full operations. Experienced women took on teaching roles, guiding newcomers through the maze of procedures, machines, and expectations. A sense of mentorship grew, though quietly and informally. The veterans of Bletchley Park, some still only in their early 20s, became the anchors that kept the operation steady. Machine operators faced increasing demands as well. The German Enigma and Lorentz systems remained active, and the Germans occasionally adjusted their procedures or encryption techniques to compensate for battlefield losses. Every change required new strategies, new settings, or new analyses. The bombs had to run faster and more frequently. The women who operated them felt as though the machines were an extension of their bodies, large, noisy beasts that demanded constant vigilance. Some operators called the bombs metal monsters, but they also felt an odd companionship with them. After months of listening to the rhythm of rotors and drums, the women could distinguish every mechanical quirk. When the bombs indicated a possible key setting, a stop, the room changed instantly. Operators leaped into action, recording the settings, checking for errors, confirming details, and passing the results to the appropriate hut. These moments delivered a rush of adrenaline, a reminder that their repetitive labor could at any moment produce something world-changing. But they also carried the anxiety of knowing how much depended on their precision. In the Colossus rooms, the atmosphere was even more intense. The Lorentz cipher, used by the highest levels of German command, produced communications that were often long and densely structured. Women operating Colossus faced a combination of physical and mental demands. They had to manage fragile paper tapes that moved at incredible speed, ensuring they didn't tear or jam. They had to monitor rows of valves that generated intense heat and frequently malfunctioned. They had to interpret the output quickly, passing results along before the next run began. The work was both futuristic and overwhelming. Despite its complexity, many women later said that working with Colossus felt strangely empowering. They had never imagined they would be operating something that resembled science fiction, something no one outside Bletchley even knew existed. Yet they became experts in this new world, quietly pioneering the future of computing without ever receiving credit. Meanwhile, the analysts in the main huts continued to face mental puzzles that pushed their cognitive limits. German communication habits, once stable, became increasingly erratic as the war turned against them. Some messages contained mistakes, forced changes made in panic. Others used unfamiliar code words. Still others reflected desperation or disorganization. For analysts and indexers, these inconsistencies were both frustrating and fruitful. They created openings through which the codebreakers could make deductions, but they also made patterns harder to track. Women working as linguists and translators encountered similar challenges. Messages often reflected deteriorating discipline within German ranks. The tone shifted. Reports grew more chaotic. Some commanders demanded reinforcements that no longer existed. Others expressed thinly veiled despair. Translators sometimes experienced emotional whiplash, transitioning from technical descriptions of troop movements to unsettling hints of human suffering, all while maintaining the emotional detachment demanded by the job. During this time, the women at Bletchley Park also faced the relentless toll of exhaustion. The war had already lasted longer than many expected. Rotating shifts meant constant disruption to sleep patterns. Night work interfered with health, meals, and social life. Some women developed chronic fatigue or caught illnesses that lingered due to the strain. Yet many continued to push through because the work felt too urgent to pause, too essential to postpone. One woman later said, "We never thought of stopping. We thought only of keeping up." Her words captured the ethos of Bletchley Park during this period, a sense that personal limits did not matter compared to the needs of the war. This dedication came with a price, but it also highlighted the extraordinary commitment the women brought to their roles. In rare moments of respite, the staff sought comfort in small pleasures. A warm day brought people out onto the lawns. Someone played a gramophone in the canteen. Couples took short walks near the lake. Friends exchanged stories about home or hopes for life after the war. These brief escapes helped the staff reclaim a sense of humanity amidst the grind. But perhaps the most emotionally complex aspect of this phase was the awareness that the war was beginning to turn decisively in the Allies' favor. Victory seemed possible, perhaps even inevitable. Yet with that hope came a sobering realization. The closer the war came to ending, the more desperate the enemy became. German communications reflected a mixture of defiance and panic. Every deciphered message revealed a regime collapsing, but also a regime that remained capable of destruction. Women at Bletchley Park read between the lines of these messages. They sensed the unraveling. They saw evidence of dwindling resources, frayed command structures, and increased internal disagreements. In some messages, coded references to atrocities appeared, hints of horrors that were only understood fully after the war. Though forbidden to discuss these fragments, the women privately carried their emotional weight. As Allied forces advanced through France and towards the German border, the work of Bletchley Park adapted again. Decrypts shifted focus to new battlegrounds. Communications between German commanders grew frantic. Messages revealed where German units planned to make their last stands, how they were rationing fuel, and what orders were being issued for defensive maneuvers. The women processing these messages felt the pace accelerate, as though the war was rushing toward its final chapters. Personal lives also evolved in this period. Some women received news from family members returning from fighting overseas. Others received devastating letters about loved ones lost. The emotional highs and lows of personal wartime experiences mingled with the unspoken pressure of their secret work. They smiled when expected, cried in private, and returned to their posts because the war did not pause for grief. Relationships deepened during these months. The shared intensity of daily life created bonds that lasted a lifetime. Some women later married colleagues they met at Bletchley. Others formed friendships so strong that they felt like family. These relationships became a source of strength, helping them endure the final, most grueling phase of the war. By late 1944 and into early 1945, the signs of Germany's impending defeat grew unmistakable. Messages revealed shortages, chaotic planning, and direct contradictions between military leaders. Hitler's communications, sent through the Lawrence system, became increasingly erratic. The women who worked with these messages sometimes found themselves glimpsing the unraveling of a dictatorship in real time. Yet even in these final months, Bletchley Park operated with rigorous discipline. The staff knew that any lapse could delay intelligence, and any delay could cost lives in the final battles across Europe. They kept working, kept decoding, kept listening, kept indexing. They pushed through exhaustion, uncertainty, and the emotional toll of witnessing the war's final tragedies. As 1945 approached, a sense of anticipation filled the air, but so did a sense of unease. What would life be like after the war? What would happen to the friendships forged in secrecy? Would the world understand what they had done? Would they even be allowed to speak of it? Most already sensed the answer. They would return home as ordinary civilians, carrying secrets they could never reveal. In this chapter, the women of Bletchley Park reached a threshold, the final year of a war they had shaped more profoundly than they knew. Their work remained hidden, their names unrecorded, their contributions unacknowledged. Yet in the frantic months after D-Day, they carried the intelligence effort with unwavering dedication, helping guide the Allies toward victory. The next chapter will follow them as the war enters its final act, one marked by triumph, loss, secrecy, and the slow realization that the world they had known inside Bletchley Park would soon vanish forever. By the beginning of 1945, the German war machine was collapsing. The Allies had advanced through France, liberated Belgium, and crossed into Germany. The Eastern Front was pushing in from the other side, with Soviet forces tightening their hold on the crumbling Reich. Yet despite the growing clarity that the war was nearing its end, the pace at Bletchley Park did not slow. The women working there soon discovered that the final months of conflict would be some of the most intense and emotionally complex of all. The frantic pace of intercepted communications continued as Germany grew increasingly desperate. Messages came in from every corner of the collapsing front, hastily transmitted updates from retreating units, panicked instructions sent between commanders, fragmented reports from isolated outposts. The Luftwaffe, unable to command the skies as it once had, relied heavily on coded communications to coordinate what remained of its forces. The German Navy, losing territory and access to key ports, tried desperately to protect what was left of its U-boat fleet. And the high-level communications passing through the Lawrence system revealed a leadership in disarray, contradictory orders, unrealistic expectations, and a growing sense of impending defeat. For the women of Bletchley Park, this period felt like a strange mixture of triumph, urgency, and sorrow. They were witnessing the unraveling of an empire built on brutality, yet they were also aware that the war was not yet over and that the last phase of conflict could prove the most violent. The lives of soldiers, civilians, and prisoners still hung in the balance. Every message mattered, and every hour of work at Bletchley could contribute to ending the suffering sooner. Inside the intercept stations, the women listened to signals that reflected the war's final chaos. Morse patterns became erratic. Some operators reported that the fists of German radio men, once steady and confident, had grown shaky or rushed. This auditory signature of panic underscored the reality that the enemy was losing control. But even so, the German communications continued, sometimes in bursts of frantic activity, as local commanders attempted to salvage untenable situations. At Bletchley Park, the women sorting and logging these intercepts found themselves busier than ever. Patterns were harder to establish because the German command structure itself was fracturing. New call signs appeared unpredictably, units dissolved or merged, orders were issued and countermanded. In this turbulent environment, the analytical skills of the women became invaluable. Their familiarity with the nuances of German signal behavior allowed them to spot subtle shifts that helped analysts piece together what was happening on the front. The women in the huts, particularly those working on Enigma and Lawrence, faced an equally demanding workload. The bombs continued to run day and night. Colossus machines processed Lawrence messages with relentless urgency. The women who operated them often felt as though they were working in a state of suspended reality, a place where machines hummed, lights blinked, and cryptographic puzzles filled every waking hour, while the outside world was inching toward peace. Some women would later describe the surreal contrast between the intensity of their work and the signs of normal life beginning to reappear in Britain. Shops extended their hours. The blackout restrictions eased in some areas. People spoke in hopeful tones about the future. Yet at Bletchley Park, daily life remained frozen in wartime urgency. The staff moved between huts, rode bicycles along muddy paths, and worked under dim lights as though the war might continue indefinitely. One of the most striking features of this period was the way secrecy continued to shape everything. Even as victory approached, the women knew that nothing about their work could be shared. Families wrote letters expressing relief at recent Allied advances, asking hopefully whether the war might be over soon. The women replied politely, but without revealing that they had seen messages confirming German retreats or internal tensions weeks before the public learned of them. Some women felt pride in this hidden knowledge. Others found it isolating, a reminder of how different their lives were from those of people outside the park. In addition to the mounting workload, emotional strain intensified. News of concentration camps began to emerge as Allied troops liberated them. Although Bletchley Park personnel were not privy to full reports, occasional coded references and decrypted hints had filtered through for years. Many women had quietly formed their own suspicions about the scale of the atrocities. When the truth became undeniable, the fragments they had glimpsed acquired a devastating clarity. Some later reflected on the chilling feeling of realizing that parts of what they had decoded had been pieces of a far greater horror than they had imagined. In these months, the Lawrence messages sometimes revealed unsettling insights into the psychological state of the Nazi leadership. Hitler's communications grew erratic, filled with unrealistic commands and delusional expectations. Some messages reflected infighting among senior officers. Others revealed the demoralization of German forces, with reports of desertions, disobedience, and units refusing to carry out suicidal orders. The women processing these messages sensed the unraveling of a regime that had once seemed impenetrably organized. Yet amidst this collapse, moments of beauty and humanity persisted at Bletchley Park. Spring arrived, bringing blooming gardens and warm breezes that drifted across the estate during shift changes. Women paused to admire flowers or sit briefly by the lake, savoring a few peaceful moments before returning to the intensity of their work. These small connections to nature helped them cope with the emotional strain of processing the final convulsions of a devastating war. Friendships deepened further during this time. Having shared years of secrecy, exhaustion, and purpose, the women felt bound together in ways that transcended ordinary relationships. They comforted each other through personal losses. They laughed over shared experiences that only another Bletchley colleague could understand: misbehaving machines, eccentric professors, and the odd rituals that had emerged from years of working strange hours in cramped huts. Some women began discussing tentative plans for life after the war. Would they return to university, seek new careers, marry sweethearts who were stationed overseas? Yet beneath these conversations lay an unspoken uncertainty. Having lived such intense, purposeful lives, many wondered how they would adjust to ordinary civilian existence. How could they return to normal when they had spent years deciphering the secrets of an empire, shaping military strategy, and working with some of the world's most advanced technologies? For others, the end of the war meant the looming end of friendships they cherished. As the conflict concluded, the workforce would inevitably disband. People who had become like family would scatter across the country, bound by secrecy that prevented them from even telling new friends how they had met. Many women later described this as one of the most emotionally difficult aspects of leaving Bletchley Park, a sense of quiet mourning for a world that would disappear overnight. As the Allies advanced deeper into Germany in early 1945, the decrypts revealed a government and military apparatus falling apart from within. Supply shortages grew catastrophic. Units reported running out of ammunition, fuel, and food. Some commanders ignored orders. Others sent desperate signals begging for reinforcements that would never come. The women at Bletchley watched this collapse unfold in intercepted fragments, like pieces of a puzzle showing a picture of total dissolution. In April 1945, messages concerning Hitler's whereabouts and the status of Berlin became a focal point. The Lawrence messages, transmitted from the highest levels, contained increasing signs of confusion and despair. Hitler's death on April 30 was not immediately confirmed through decrypts, but the abrupt shift in tone and command structure in subsequent messages gave Bletchley analysts and translators clear indications that something monumental had occurred. When Germany finally surrendered on May 7, 1945, the reaction at Bletchley Park was not one of loud celebration. Instead, a strange quiet settled over the huts. Women who had worked day and night for years felt a mixture of relief, disbelief, and a deep, exhausting release. Some cried. Some sat silently at their desks. Others hugged colleagues who had become as close as siblings. Yet even on that day, the secrecy remained. No one cheered publicly. No one boasted. The women who had helped shorten the war by years simply went back to work, cataloguing final messages, tying up loose ends, and preparing for the sudden dismantling of the world they had known. The war was over, but their story was not. In the next chapter, we will follow the women as they transition from the extraordinary secrecy and purpose of Bletchley Park to a world that had no idea what they had done and did not yet know how to value the brilliance they had shown in the service of their country. When victory was declared in Europe, bells rang across Britain, crowds flooded the streets, and the nation erupted in celebration. But inside Bletchley Park, the moment landed with a strange quietness. The women who had contributed so much to the victory experienced the end of the war not with shouts and jubilation, but with a complicated blend of relief, exhaustion, and uncertainty. After years of secrecy and purpose, they suddenly faced a future where the work that had defined them would immediately vanish into silence. The immediate days after Germany's surrender brought a surreal shift on the estate. The frantic pace that had dominated every hour began to slow, though not abruptly. Some decrypting and monitoring continued as Allied forces moved to secure German territories and unravel remaining intelligence puzzles. But the rhythm had changed. The sense of urgency that had pulsed through the huts for years dissipated like mist. Women who had spent countless nights racing against time now found themselves with tasks that felt strangely anticlimactic. Cataloging documents, finishing paperwork, archiving incomplete projects. For many, this new quiet felt unsettling. They had grown used to the hum of machines, the sharp clatter of bombs, the constant footsteps up and down hut corridors. They had lived for years in a world where every scrap of information carried immense importance. To sit at a desk and sort through documents that no longer directly influenced the war's outcome felt hollow. They were proud of their work, but the sudden shift from critical urgency to routine clerical tasks left some women feeling unmoored. Then came the demobilization process. One by one, the women were called in for briefings that formally ended their service. They were thanked politely and instructed, again, that everything they had done remained covered by the Official Secrets Act. They were not permitted to speak of it, not now, not ever. This instruction was delivered without flexibility, without discussion, and without recognition that it would deeply shape the rest of their lives. Women who had cracked vital codes, operated the world's first programmable computers, and deciphered high-level communications were told they must tell family members only that they had done general clerical work. Some left Bletchley Park without even knowing what neighboring huts had worked on. Their world had been carved into compartments that would remain sealed indefinitely. This secrecy affected each woman differently. Some accepted it with stoic discipline. Others felt frustrated that they could not share the most defining years of their life with those closest to them. Many felt a sudden diminishment of identity. They had done extraordinary work, yet they could not claim it, describe it, or receive acknowledgement for it. And then, with their secrecy oath weighing heavily on them, they left. They walked out through the gates of Bletchley Park, on foot, by bicycle, by bus, with no ceremony, no medals, no formal recognition of their contributions. Most expected to slip back into ordinary civilian life as if the past years had not fundamentally changed them. But re-entering the ordinary world was harder than it seemed. The transition from the intensity of Bletchley Park to the relative calm of post-war Britain proved disorienting. Women returned home to families who had no idea what they had been doing and who often assumed they had spent the war typing letters or doing minor office tasks. The women could not correct these assumptions. Even when asked directly, "What did you really do during the war?" they had to deflect, change the subject, or repeat the official cover story. Some parents were disappointed, believing their daughters had been sidelined into unimportant work. Some husbands later wondered why their wives had not done something more meaningful during the war. The women swallowed these misunderstandings silently, knowing they could not defend themselves without breaking the law. For those who sought employment after the war, the secrecy barrier became another obstacle. Employers had no idea of the technical skills these women possessed. They did not know that the young woman applying for a clerical job had run complex electromechanical machines or had processed high-level intelligence at incredible speeds. They did not know she had been responsible for interpreting patterns that helped direct military strategy. All they saw was a woman with a vague wartime job she could not discuss. Many women returned to roles that felt far beneath their abilities. Some became secretaries, teachers, or shop workers, honorable jobs, but incomparable to the intellectual challenges they had faced during the war. A few managed to pursue higher education or careers in academia, mathematics, or emerging fields like computing, but these cases were rare. Society still expected most women to step aside as men returned from war and reclaimed the workforce. Yet even as society pushed them toward traditional roles, the women carried inward transformations. For many, Bletchley Park had been the first place where their intellect was sought, valued, and essential. They had proven to themselves, if not the world, that they could tackle complex problems, master new technologies, and operate under pressure that would break many. They learned leadership, resilience, critical thinking, and self-reliance. They had been part of something enormous, something history-shaping, even if history did not know it yet. This inner confidence shaped their post-war lives. Some women became formidable community leaders, educators, or advocates. Others carried themselves with a quiet strength, knowing they had already faced and overcome extraordinary challenges. Even if they could not talk about their wartime roles, the experience lived within them, subtly influencing decisions, relationships, and ambitions. Of course, not all found the transition easy. Some women struggled with the abrupt loss of purpose. For years, they had woken each day knowing their work mattered profoundly. Now they lacked that clarity. Some missed the camaraderie intensely. The friendships forged at Bletchley Park were often among the deepest of their lives, built on shared secrecy, pressure, and long nights of teamwork. After the war, many found it difficult to maintain these bonds. Geography, careers, and family responsibilities pulled them apart, and the secrecy surrounding their shared experience meant they could not even explain to others why these friendships were so important. The emotional toll also lingered. Women who had glimpsed the darkest aspects of the war through intercepted messages carried that knowledge quietly. Some had nightmares. Others felt the weight of responsibility long after the last message had been decoded. With no outlet for these emotions, no counseling, no public acknowledgement of their work, they bore the burden silently. Bletchley Park itself underwent a transformation as the intelligence apparatus was reorganized. Some of the equipment was dismantled. Many documents were destroyed to maintain security. The estate gradually returned to obscurity. The huts that had once hummed with urgency returned to stillness. The grounds, which had once held bicycles, bustling staff, and classified documents, became quiet again. Meanwhile, the world moved forward, unaware of the secret foundation upon which its freedom had partly been built. The Cold War soon emerged, and the importance of signals intelligence continued. But the women of Bletchley Park watched from the sidelines, still bound by secrecy, still invisible in the public narrative of wartime heroism. Many historians, lacking access to classified material, assumed that wartime intelligence had been a predominantly male domain. The women, reading newspapers or watching documentaries that ignored their existence, felt a peculiar mixture of resignation and amusement. They knew the truth, and perhaps someday, they thought, the world would too. For some, secrecy became second nature, internalized so deeply that even after the Official Secrets Act restrictions were relaxed decades later, they still refused to speak of their experiences. Daughters and sons often learned of their mothers' roles only after finding old documents or encountering published histories that mentioned Bletchley Park. In other cases, the truth came out when elderly women finally realized they could talk, and then revealed stories more remarkable than their families had ever imagined. But in 1945, and the years immediately following, the women lived quietly, rebuilding their lives in a country trying to recover from war. They married, raised families, pursued careers, or embraced domestic life. They celebrated weddings, mourned losses, and watched as Britain transformed socially, economically, and technologically. The world they had helped shape moved into a new era, unaware of the codebreakers who had accelerated its liberation. And the women, though unrecognized, carried with them the knowledge of what they had accomplished. The next chapter will explore the decades of silence that followed, the gradual unmasking of Bletchley Park's secrets, and how these remarkable women finally stepped into the light of history after a lifetime spent in the shadows. In the years immediately following the war, the women of Bletchley Park dispersed quietly across Britain and the wider world. Their departure was not marked by fanfare or formal ceremonies. For most, it came down to a simple instruction: thank you for your service, remember your oath, and return to ordinary life. No one outside those gates could have imagined that these women had spent years shaping military strategy, saving ships and lives, and helping shorten the war by an estimated 2 to 4 years. And to the women themselves, the world they were re-entering felt both familiar and strangely foreign. One of the most challenging aspects of the transition was the abrupt end of the intense purpose that had defined their wartime existence. At Bletchley Park, every day had carried urgent meaning. Every intercepted message, every machine reading, every pattern analysis influenced events unfolding on distant battlefields. The women had lived in a world where intellectual effort translated directly into survival. Returning to civilian routines felt muted by comparison. There were no more frantic night shifts, no more races against time, no more sudden breakthroughs that sent ripples through military command. Yet they were required to carry themselves as though nothing extraordinary had happened. The Official Secrets Act reinforced this silence. The women were warned again that the work they had done was to remain unspoken indefinitely. They were told that discussing their roles could jeopardize national security. The gravity of this instruction weighed heavily. Many women abided by it so strictly that they never told a single person, not even their spouses, what they had done during the war. This secrecy created a quiet isolation. While soldiers returned home to parades, medals, and thanks, the women codebreakers returned to the perception of ordinary service. Families often assumed the work had been clerical. Some believed their daughters had spent the war typing memos or filing documents. The women could not correct these assumptions. They nodded politely and carried on. Romantic partners seldom understood either. Some women later recalled that their husbands believed they had done light office work or administrative support. These misunderstandings were not simply frustrating. They sometimes influenced the entire trajectory of a woman's life. Unable to reveal their skills, many women found themselves consigned to traditional roles or jobs far below their true capabilities. Societal expectations played a major role. Post-war Britain was eager to re-establish familiar norms. Women who had worked in factories, farms, transport, or military roles during the war were encouraged and sometimes pressured to step aside and make room for returning men. Some complied readily, longing for stability. Others did so with mixed feelings, knowing they had demonstrated abilities far beyond what society now allowed them to express. But even within the constraints of the era, the women of Bletchley Park carried with them a quiet, powerful confidence that often shaped their futures in subtle ways. Some returned to universities on scholarship programs granted to former service members. In lecture halls, they sat beside men who had fought in Europe or the Pacific, none of whom knew that the woman at the next desk had once decrypted messages that shaped those very battles. Several women pursued mathematics, languages, or newly developing fields like statistics. Others went into medicine, education, or public service. Yet many women did not have such opportunities. Economic realities, family obligations, and lingering cultural norms influenced their choices. They married, raised children, and built homes in a Britain recovering from wartime austerity. But even these women often found quiet ways to continue exercising their talents, running community organizations, teaching with extraordinary skill, or managing complex family affairs with the discipline and precision they had learned inside the huts. Friendships formed at Bletchley Park attempted to survive across distance and secrecy. Women wrote letters that said everything except the things they most wanted to say. Reunions were rare, partly because of geography and partly because secrecy made it difficult to articulate why a particular friendship mattered so deeply. Some friendships endured despite these challenges, bonded by experiences that did not need to be spoken aloud. Others faded naturally as the decades reshaped their lives. The 1950s and 1960s passed quietly for most of the former codebreakers. The Cold War intensified, but they remained on the sidelines, watching as governments built new intelligence agencies that drew on the foundations they had helped establish. Occasionally, in newspapers or books, they encountered references to wartime intelligence efforts that either minimized or misrepresented the truth. They rarely corrected such inaccuracies. Their oath held firm. Still, they sometimes wondered if the world would ever understand. By the 1970s, many of the women were in their 40s or 50s. Some were raising teenagers. Some were becoming grandmothers. Some were entering new phases of their careers. And then, quietly, the first cracks in the wall of secrecy began to appear. The publication of a book by a former intelligence officer revealing parts of the ultra-secret caught many by surprise. Even then, many women hesitated to speak. They wanted confirmation from official sources before saying anything that might violate their oath. That confirmation came slowly, in carefully controlled releases of information. Each new disclosure lifted a tiny corner of the veil. During this period, the former codebreakers began reaching out to one another, cautiously at first, then more confidently as they realized they were finally allowed to speak. Some reconnected with friends they had not seen since 1945. They shared memories, compared notes, and for the first time in decades, openly acknowledged the extraordinary nature of their wartime work. For some women, this revelation brought a profound emotional release. Memories that had been locked away for a lifetime surfaced, often with surprising clarity. They remembered the chill of night shifts, the hum of bombs, the glow of Colossus valves, the tension in the air during D-Day. They remembered the jokes, the songs, the friendships, and the heartbreaks. They remembered the intellectual triumphs that had once defined their days. For others, speaking openly after so many years felt almost impossible. They had kept the secret so well that it had become part of them. Some women revealed their Bletchley connection only reluctantly and only to family. A few never spoke of it at all, even after full declassification. Their stories emerged only after they passed away, discovered in letters, certificates, or brief mentions in military records. By the time Bletchley Park was restored as a museum in the 1990s and 2000s, many of the women were elderly. They visited the huts where they had once worked, now carefully preserved, and walked again the paths they had rushed along during wartime urgency. Some described the visits as deeply emotional, like stepping back into a version of themselves they had set aside decades earlier. Seeing visitors, students, and historians honoring their work filled them with pride they had never sought but deeply deserved. The world finally began to understand that without these women, the intelligence triumphs of the Second World War would not have been possible. Their discipline, patience, skill, and resilience had been the backbone of the code-breaking effort. They had kept secrets not only from the enemy, but from their own society, sacrificing recognition for the sake of duty. In their later years, many women reflected on the strangeness of having lived two lives, one entirely ordinary, one completely extraordinary. They spoke of the war as a time of purpose, intensity, and camaraderie that they never again experienced. And they spoke of the decades of silence as both an obligation they honored and a burden they carried. Some felt that the secrecy had robbed them of opportunities. Others believed it had protected them from unwanted attention. Most simply accepted it as part of the role they had played in history. As they aged, tributes increased, medals were awarded, interviews were recorded, documentaries featured their stories, students wrote essays about them, museums displayed their photographs, their names, once buried under oath, entered the public consciousness. In these acknowledgments, the women found quiet satisfaction, not because they craved fame, but because they knew that future generations would see them not as ordinary wartime clerks, but as brilliant, dedicated individuals who had shaped the world in profound, invisible ways. Their story is one of silence and revelation, of hidden brilliance and eventual recognition. And as the years passed, the women came to understand that the world finally saw them clearly, not as ghosts of a secret past, but as pioneers whose contributions echoed far beyond the huts of Bletchley Park. For decades after the war, the women of Bletchley Park lived in a world that had no idea what they had done. Their work, once the beating heart of Britain's intelligence effort, slipped into silence, overshadowed by public celebrations of battles, generals, pilots, and political figures. They carried on with their lives as if the years inside the huts, the machine rooms, the listening stations, and the analysis blocks had been nothing more than ordinary service. But of course, they had not been ordinary at all. We tend to imagine history as something loud. Tanks rolling, bombs falling, speeches echoing across crowds. Yet the war's ending, and the decades that followed, proved that some of the most influential acts in history are carried out in silence. And the women codebreakers lived in that silence longer than anyone could have imagined. In the years immediately following 1945, life shifted quickly. Britain was rebuilding, demobilizing, and redefining itself. Society encouraged women to return to traditional roles: marriage, home life, supporting roles in the workplace. Many of the Bletchley women followed this path because it was what stability required, and because the Official Secrets Act made it impossible for them to present themselves as anything other than ordinary workers. They buried their extraordinary experiences beneath layers of polite, small talk and carefully worded explanations. Some felt a nagging sense of loss, not simply for the friendships and the purpose they had known, but for the sharp, exhilarating intellectual engagement that had defined their days at Bletchley Park. It was difficult to go from operating advanced machines or deciphering strategic communications to typing memos or managing household accounts. The contrast was jarring. A few sought out careers where their analytical abilities could flourish. Others found outlets in local politics, teaching, voluntary service, or scientific fields. But a great many quietly adapted to lives that never again asked them to stretch the abilities they had proven during the war. Even so, the knowledge of what they had accomplished settled deep within them like a steady flame. They did not need applause, they did not need medals, they knew, and that knowledge shaped them in subtle, enduring ways. The decades passed. Children grew up unaware of the extraordinary chapters hidden in their mothers' or grandmothers' lives. Husbands sometimes suspected their wives had done something unusual, but were never certain. Bletchley Park itself decayed quietly, its huts falling into disrepair, its grounds taken over by later tenants who had no idea how much history had been made within those walls. Yet, although the women remained silent, the truth waited patiently for its moment. The transformation began in the mid-1970s, when the first hints of Bletchley Park's role were declassified and mentioned publicly. Even then, many women did not break their silence. They feared that speaking out might violate laws they had sworn to uphold. Some simply could not imagine talking openly about something they had kept secret for so long. But little by little, the world began to learn. As more files were released in the 1980s and 1990s, historians, journalists, and surviving codebreakers began telling the story. What emerged stunned the public. It was not only the brilliance of the code-breaking that astonished people, it was the scale of it and the realization that so much of the work had been done by women. Names that had been hidden for decades began to surface. Interviews were recorded. Memoirs were written. Families learned, often in disbelief, what their mothers or grandmothers had done. One woman's son famously said, upon learning his mother had worked on Colossus, "I knew she was clever, but I didn't know she had helped invent the future." Another recalled reading about Bletchley Park in a newspaper and recognizing a detail his mother had once let slip years earlier. When he confronted her gently, she simply said, "Well, yes, I suppose that story is about me," as though it were the most ordinary thing in the world. For many of the women, the moment when they could finally speak brought a mixture of pride, relief, and lingering disbelief. Some gave interviews with the same measured precision they had once used in the huts. Others broke into smiles as they described memories that had long been hidden in a locked part of their minds. A few cried, not out of sadness, but out of the release of carrying a secret for so long. Recognition grew steadily. Documentaries were made, books were published. Bletchley Park itself was restored, turned into a museum where visitors could walk the same corridors where women once hurried with coded intercepts in hand. The sounds of bombs were reconstructed. The Colossus was rebuilt. In those spaces, the public began to appreciate not just the machines, but the people, the thousands of women whose endurance, intellect, and dedication had quietly changed the course of history. And the more people learned, the more it became clear how foundational women were to the entire operation. They were not footnotes. They were the workforce, the engine, the relentless human power that kept the intelligence system functioning. They had operated machines that paved the way for modern computing. They had deciphered patterns that saved convoys from U-boats, shaped the D-Day invasion, and shortened the war. They had broken codes once deemed unbreakable. They had held their nerve through exhaustion, secrecy, and emotional strain. They had proved, beyond any measure of doubt, what women were capable of when given the chance to contribute fully. This revelation reshaped historical narratives. Universities began teaching the story of Bletchley Park as an early example of women in STEM. Scholars highlighted how these women challenged gender expectations decades before the feminist movements of the 1960s and 70s. Their work demonstrated that brilliance and resilience were not limited by gender, only by opportunity. And during the war, opportunity had come suddenly, unexpectedly, and urgently. As the women aged into their 60s, 70s, 80s, and 90s, many of them received honors they never expected. Ceremonies were held, medals were awarded. Prime ministers and presidents acknowledged their contributions. Schoolchildren learned their names. Museums invited them to speak. For the first time, the world recognized these women as war heroes, not in the traditional sense of battlefield courage, but in the equally vital sense of intellect, endurance, and moral strength under unimaginable pressure. For some, public recognition came too late. Many had already passed away before their secrets were revealed, but their families embraced their stories with pride, ensuring their legacies lived on. And as these stories emerged, they illuminated something deeper, that history is not only shaped by those who stand in the spotlight, but by those who labor in the shadows, whose contributions remain unseen until the world is ready to understand them. The women codebreakers of Bletchley Park represent a quiet kind of heroism, one defined not by glory, but by duty, not by recognition, but by service, not by public triumph, but by private excellence. Their work shortened one of the deadliest wars in human history. It saved lives. It introduced concepts that would eventually give rise to the digital age. And it demonstrated that when given the chance, women could master the most complex challenges known to science, mathematics, and engineering. Their story remains one of the most extraordinary tales of hidden brilliance in the modern era. And as we close this documentary script and look back at the long path from the hidden huts of Bletchley Park to the world's belated recognition of its quiet workforce, we honor them not only for what they did, but for how they did it, with integrity, humility, and quiet courage. Thank you for listening to their story. If you've enjoyed this documentary and want to hear more stories like this, about hidden heroes, forgotten histories, and extraordinary people whose contributions shaped our world, please consider subscribing, liking, and sharing. Your support helps bring more of these important stories to light, ensuring that the voices of those who were once forgotten will always be heard.